The desert stretched in every direction, endless and harsh, carrying the heat like a punishment no one could escape. Max wandered through it alone, moving with the wary instinct of someone who had spent too many years running but never arriving anywhere. His mind was crowded with voices he didn't invite. They came from memories he wished he could discard, fragments of people he had failed to protect, faces that flashed in and out of sight whenever he blinked too long. He tried to drown them out by focusing on the rhythm of his breath and the crunch of sand under his boots, but nothing truly silenced them. He no longer looked for peace. He only looked for the next moment to survive. It didn't take long for engines to break the quiet. The war boys swept down on him in a swarm of dust and shouting, pale bodies painted with symbols of devotion, eyes burning with a kind of fanatic hunger. Max fought hard, but he was exhausted and outnumbered. They pinned him, dragged him across the desert and hauled him into their rusted metal fortress. The Citadel stood like a jagged wound carved into rock, towering above the wasteland. Inside, water was hoarded behind thick gates, and those who controlled it controlled everything. Immortan Joe was the one who ruled it all. People worshipped him partly out of fear and partly out of desperation. He held their survival in the palm of his hand. Max was taken underground, strapped into chains that left him barely able to move. The war boys examined him with cold interest. They cared little about who he was. What they wanted was his blood. Nux, a sickly but eager young war boy, claimed Max as his blood bag, fastening him to a line that pumped Max's blood directly into his own arm. Max's identity was reduced to a single function. He became a resource, not a man, another thing to be drained in a world already stripped of nearly everything. Elsewhere in the Citadel, a massive war rig rumbled to life. It belonged to Imperator Furiosa, 1-0. The war rig pushed toward the open desert with a steady rumble, its weight shaking the sand beneath the tires. Furiosa kept her eyes narrowed against the glare, scanning the horizon for shapes that didn't belong. She knew Joe would come after her with everything he had. The wives sat behind her inside the rig, huddled together, their breaths shallow but hopeful. They had no idea how far they would need to go, only that going back meant captivity. Furiosa didn't give them false comfort. She told them to stay ready, keep watch and move when she told them to. In a world as broken as theirs, survival depended on clarity. Behind them, the dust cloud thickened. Joe had launched his war parties with the speed of a man who believed his ownership had been challenged. Cars covered in spikes and bone, motorcycles with pipes roaring like beasts, and the towering vehicle Joe rode in himself sped across the wasteland. The war boys screamed chants of loyalty, pounding the sides of their cars, smearing chrome paint on their lips as if preparing for a holy moment. In the middle of the chaos, Max was still strapped to the front of Nux's car, used as a living ornament and a source of blood. He tried to brace himself against the wind and the jarring shakes of the vehicle, knowing he had no control. Nux drove with manic energy, convinced that catching Furiosa would earn him Joe's blessing and a glorious afterlife. Furiosa spotted the distant rumble and pushed the rig harder. She steered toward a looming wall of cloud that curled upward like a living thing. It was a storm the size of the horizon, whirling with sand, lightning and debris. Entering it would be like surrendering to chaos, but staying in the open desert meant certain capture. She tightened her grip on the wheel. The wives saw the towering storm ahead and fear flickered across their faces, but they trusted Furiosa more than anything they'd left behind. With a single deep breath, she drove straight into the heart of it. The desert stretched endlessly, a white glare of salt flats and cracked sand. Furiosa guided the war rig through the open expanse, each mile testing both the machine and the people on it. The wives huddled together, their eyes scanning every shimmer on the horizon for threats, but the emptiness offered no comfort. Behind them, Nux sat slumped, recovering from the storm but still determined to fight for whatever glory he thought awaited him. Max, finally free to move, paced the rig's frame, eyes sharp for anything that could end them before they reached their uncertain goal. The silence of the salt flats was deceptive. Dust kicked up in the distance, shadows of vehicles moving faster than the wind. Joe had regrouped, rallying his war boys and allies from neighboring wasteland tribes. They had learned quickly from the storm's chaos, reorganizing in lines of jagged metal and engines screaming. Every vehicle was bristling with weapons, every war boy primed for the moment they would catch Furiosa. Joe himself rode high in his monstrous car, eyes burning behind the mask, hands tightening on the wheel as he stared toward the distant rig. Furiosa navigated the treacherous terrain, following an old memory of a place she hoped could become a sanctuary, the Green Land. In her youth, she had known a land where crops grew, water flowed and life carried a rhythm not dictated by cruelty. It had been stolen from her, taken by circumstance and blood, and now she chased a ghost. Max noticed the way her eyes flickered whenever the horizon changed, the way her jaw tightened when the desert threatened to swallow them whole. He realized she carried more than hope, she carried the weight of every lost possibility she had ever known. Days passed in a blur of sand, exhaustion, and vigilance. The rig needed fuel, water, and constant repair. Max worked alongside Furiosa, tightening chains, patching torn canvas, and guiding the wives to safety when the vehicle swayed on treacherous ground. The war rig roared westward, engines screaming as though the desert itself could hear their determination. The sun burned overhead, casting long, jagged shadows over the cracked earth. Furiosa gripped the wheel, every muscle tense, while the wives leaned into the motion, clutching each other for balance and courage. Max moved along the rig's frame, scanning the horizon, every sense alert to the slightest movement. They were heading straight into the teeth of danger, but for the first time, they carried not just hope for themselves, but a purpose that stretched far beyond survival. Joe's convoy appeared on the horizon like a gathering storm. War boys lined the vehicles, spears and guns raised, their war cries piercing the wind. The Citadel loomed faintly behind them, a distant reminder of the tyranny they had escaped and now intended to challenge. The desert vibrated with the roar of engines, metal scraping against metal, and the cries of those driven by obsession and fanaticism. Nux, newly awakened to a sense of loyalty beyond Joe, clung to the rig, eyes wide, heart pounding, ready to fight for something greater than himself. As the two forces collided on the salt flats, chaos erupted. Vehicles rammed and skidded, tires tore through the brittle surface, and dust clouds enveloped combatants like a living storm. Furiosa swung from the rig to intercept attackers, wielding makeshift weapons with precise fury. Max fought atop the rig, sliding along metal, throwing punches, and breaking through the war boys' attempts to overwhelm them. Every second was life or death, every motion a negotiation with the desert itself. The wives, no longer passive, fought beside Furiosa, their fear transformed into resolve, each of them striking blows they had never imagined themselves capable of. The final confrontation came as the rig approached the Citadel's gates. Joe's massive vehicle lunged forward, a monster among men, seeking to reclaim his lost control. Furiosa met him head-on.